The highway stretched out like a black scar across the Nevada desert that night, an endless ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the dark, the stars above cold and distant, the hum of my rig's engine a low, steady growl that vibrated through my bones, the dashboard clock flickering 2:17 a.m., its green glow the only light in the cab besides the faint red tip of my cigarette. My name's Travis, 42, a long-haul trucker with a face weathered by too much sun and too little sleep, my brown hair buzzed short under a faded cap, my flannel shirt damp with sweat despite the chill outside, my boots scuffed from years of stomping gravel lots and greasy diner floors, my hands, calloused and scarred, gripping the wheel tight, keeping me steady as the road unrolled ahead. I'd been driving 16 hours straight, my eyes stinging, my back aching, my CB radio spitting static and fragments of voices from truckers miles away, their chatter a lifeline I clung to when the silence got too loud. The load in the trailer was routine, crates labeled machinery parts, bound for a warehouse in Reno, paperwork all in order, but the weight in my chest wasn't part of the manifest. It started 3 months back, a late-night pickup in Tulsa, Oklahoma, under a flickering street lamp outside a rundown warehouse, the air thick with humidity and the sour tang of oil. A guy in a cheap suit, his tie loose, his eyes darting, handed me an envelope stuffed with cash, more money than I'd seen in years, thick enough to choke on if you tried swallowing it whole. His voice was low, clipped, barely audible over the cicadas. "Don't look inside, Travis. Just drive." I didn't look, not then, just nodded, shoved it under the seat into a dented lockbox I kept for emergencies, and peeled out, the gravel crunching under my tires, my gut twisting with an itch I couldn't name, a feeling that I'd just stepped into something bigger than a paycheck. Tonight, the road felt off, the shadows sharper, the silence heavier, like the desert itself was holding its breath. I flicked my cigarette butt out the window, watched it spark and die on the pavement, my rearview mirror catching flickers that shouldn't have been there, a pair of headlights, faint, too steady to be random, tailing me maybe, or my mind playing tricks after too many miles. I lit another smoke, the flame trembling in my hand, the smoke curling thick around the cab, my thoughts drifting to that lockbox, its edges fraying like my nerves, the envelope inside a secret I hadn't dared touch. The CB crackled again, some trucker miles back warning about a speed trap ahead, his voice cutting through the haze, but I wasn't worried about cops or tickets tonight, I was worried about the weight, the cash, the thing I was starting to suspect wasn't just money. The desert rolled on, vast and empty, the headlights slicing through the night, my rig a lone beast lumbering across the sand, my pulse ticking up as those lights in the mirror grew brighter, closer, too deliberate to ignore, a shadow I couldn't shake. The diner glowed like a cheap neon savior at 4 a.m., a rundown joint off I-80 in the middle of nowhere, its sign buzzing faintly, the parking lot a patchwork of rigs and rusting sedans, their chrome glinting under sodium lights, the air heavy with the smell of burnt coffee, fried grease, and the faint tang of diesel drifting in from the pumps. I pushed through the door, the bell jangling above me, my boots thudding on cracked linoleum stained with years of spills, my hands stuffed deep in my jacket pockets to hide the shake I couldn't stop, my cap pulled low over my eyes as I scanned the room. Truckers hunched over plates of eggs and hash browns, their faces lined with exhaustion, their voices a low rumble of road stories and complaints, a waitress with sagging shoulders and a smoker's rasp shuffled between tables, her apron smudged with ketchup, a guy in a gray hoodie sat alone in the corner, nursing a Coke, his eyes lingering on me too long, his fingers tapping an uneven rhythm on the glass. I slid into a booth by the window, the vinyl seat creaking under my weight, the table sticky with old syrup, my reflection staring back from the glass, hollow eyes, stubble thick on my jaw, a man who'd aged a decade in 3 months. I ordered black coffee, my voice rough from hours of silence, my fingers drumming the tabletop, my mind locked on that lockbox under the seat, still unopened, still gnawing at me like a toothache you can't reach. It had been a week since Tulsa, a week of hauling that load across state lines, Oklahoma to Texas, then up through New Mexico, each mile stretching the itch tighter, each night spent in my cab or a cheap motel room amplifying the feeling of eyes I couldn't see, footsteps I couldn't hear. The envelope wasn't alone anymore, I'd added a burner phone, slipped to me in Omaha by a woman with no name, her face half hidden under a scarf, her whisper sharp as a blade, "Answer when it rings, Travis." It hadn't rung yet, but it weighed down my pocket, its silence louder than the diner's jukebox spitting out some twangy country tune about heartbreak and highways. The coffee came, steaming and bitter, the mug chipped, my hands wrapping around it for warmth as I replayed the last drop-off. Phoenix, a warehouse with no sign, just a concrete box in a maze of industrial decay, a guy with a scar across his cheek taking the crates, his nod too quick, too practiced, his eyes avoiding mine like he knew something I didn't. Those lights in my mirror last night weren't a fluke, they'd paced me for 50 miles through the desert, steady and unblinking, before peeling off into the dark, leaving me with a knot in my gut and a question I couldn't shake. I sipped the coffee, its heat searing my throat, my cigarette pack empty now, my resolve fraying like the threads of my jacket. The hoodie guy stood, dropped a crumpled bill on the table, and walked out, his shadow passing my rig in the lot, pausing too long by the trailer, his head tilted like he was listening, searching. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched through the streaked window, the glass fogging with my breath, knowing I was in deep, knowing I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, knowing the road ahead was about to get a whole lot uglier. The rain came down in sheets that afternoon, a gray wall of water slashing across Highway 50, the loneliest road in America, they call it, and it felt like it, too, my wipers slapping a frantic rhythm against the windshield, my rig rumbling through puddles that splashed up to the windows, my knuckles white on the wheel, my head pounding from no sleep and too much diner coffee, the taste of it still sour on my tongue. The lockbox rattled under the seat with every bump, a constant reminder of Tulsa, of that envelope, of the cash I hadn't touched, of the burner phone that still hadn't rung, its silence a scream piercing through the storm, 3 weeks into this mess I couldn't name. I'd picked up a new load in Salt Lake City yesterday, tires, legit on paper, the kind of haul I'd done 100 times, but the itch hadn't faded, the weight in my chest hadn't lifted, the shadows in my mirror hadn't stopped trailing. Last night, at a truck stop in Ely, I'd found a note slipped under my cab door, scrawled in black ink on a torn scrap of paper, "Keep driving, Travis." No name, no hint, just those 3 words staring up at me under the dim glow of my cab light, a chill sinking into my bones as I held it, my hands trembling, my breath catching. I'd burned it in the sink, the flame licking the edges, the ashes swirling down the drain with a hiss, my fingers fumbling as I checked the locks, as I peered out the window into the dark lot, the rigs around me silent hulks, their drivers asleep or oblivious, my eyes searching for faces I didn't know, for movement that didn't belong. The rain blurred the road now, turning it into a slick, shimmering snake, my headlights barely cutting through the downpour, my CB radio dead quiet, the static replaced by the roar of water against metal. I caught a shape in the haze, a black SUV parked on the shoulder, its engine idling, its driver a vague smudge behind tinted glass, rain streaking down the windshield like tears. I eased off the gas, my breath hitching, my gut screaming to floor it, my brain whispering to stop, to face whatever this was. The SUV didn't move, just sat there, a predator in the storm, watching me crawl past, its presence a weight I couldn't shake. I kept going, my tires hissing through the wet, my mind racing. Had they seen me take the envelope in Tulsa? Did they know I hadn't opened it? Were they the ones who left the note? The burner phone buzzed once in my pocket, a single sharp pulse that made me flinch, my heart slamming against my ribs as I fumbled for it, my fingers slick with sweat, my eyes darting between the road and the screen, waiting for it to ring again, praying it wouldn't, dreading it would. The rain kept falling, the highway kept stretching, the SUV faded into the gray behind me, but the feeling stayed, eyes in the storm, tracking me, closing in. The sun baked the asphalt that morning, a relentless heat rising off I-40 in Arizona, the air shimmering like a mirage, the horizon a wavy line of sand and scrub, my rig groaning under a load of steel beams, the trailer creaking with every shift, my eyes bloodshot behind scratched sunglasses, my flannel shirt sticking to my back, my cap soaked with sweat, my fingers drumming the wheel to keep my mind from drifting too far. For weeks since Tulsa, for weeks of hauling secrets I didn't ask for weeks of dodging shadows that wouldn't let go, the lockbox, the phone, the note, all piling up like storm clouds I couldn't outrun. The burner had rung last night, 3 a.m. at a rest stop near Flagstaff, the air cool and thin, the stars sharp overhead, my rig parked between 2 others, their engines ticking as they cooled. I'd been half asleep, sprawled across the bunk, when it buzzed, the sound jolting me upright, my hand groping for it in the dark. A voice I didn't know, clipped and cold, cut through the line, "Check the envelope, Travis. Now." They hung up before I could curse, before I could demand a name, my hands trembling as I stared at the lockbox, its dull metal glinting in the faint light, my heart pounding as I fought the urge to rip it open, to see what I'd been carrying all this time. I didn't. I lit a cigarette instead, chain-smoked 3 in a row, the cab filling with a haze that stung my eyes, my mind replaying that voice, the way it said my name, like they'd known me forever, like they'd been watching longer than I'd guessed. The road was empty now. Too empty, the desert sprawling wide and silent on both sides, my CB spitting static and snippets of trucker talk, someone griping about fuel prices, someone else laughing about a bar fight, but it faded to noise as I drove, my mirror catching a glint, a truck, half a mile back, black paint gleaming in the sun, pacing me steady, its shape familiar. I'd seen it before, 2 nights ago in New Mexico, parked at a gas station outside Albuquerque. Its driver a silhouette in a cap pulled low, his head turned away as I fueled up, his rig idling like it was waiting. I floored it now, the engine roaring, the rig lurching forward, my pulse racing, my thoughts a mess. Cash didn't need a tail, Cash didn't need a phone, Cash didn't know my damn name. The lockbox thumped again, a heartbeat under the seat, a secret I couldn't outrun, a chain I'd wrapped around myself without knowing how tight it'd pull. The fog rolled in thick that night, a suffocating blanket over I-25 in Colorado, the kind of mist that turns the world into a gray void, my headlights barely piercing it, my rig crawling at 30 miles an hour, the road a faint outline under my tires, my hands slick with sweat on the wheel, my breath fogging the cab, my nerves frayed to threads after 5 weeks of this nightmare. The lockbox was a tumor now, growing heavier every day, the burner phone a ticking bomb in my pocket, the black truck a constant shadow I couldn't shake. It had been there since Arizona, pacing me across state lines, its lights a ghost in my mirror. I'd cracked the envelope open last night, a cheap motel in Pueblo, the kind with stained carpets and buzzing fluorescents, my hands shaking as I sat on the sagging bed, the lockbox open on my lap, the seal tearing with a sound that echoed in the quiet room. Cash, yeah, 10 grand in crisp 50s, more than I'd make in months, but under it, a photo, grainy and dark, time-stamped, me, unloading those crates in Phoenix, my face clear under the warehouse lights, my rig in the background, proof someone had been watching, proof I was more than a driver now, proof I was in too deep. My stomach dropped, my cigarette fell to the floor, burning a hole in the carpet before I stomped it out, my mind screaming, who took this? Why me? The phone rang an hour later, same voice, same ice, you looked good. Drop it in Denver. No details, no threats, just an order that hung in the air like the fog outside, thick and choking. I'd paced the room, my boots wearing a path in the filth, my hands running through my hair, my thoughts a storm. Who were they? What had I hauled in Phoenix? The fog hid the road now, my CB dead, my mirror empty for once, but I felt them, eyes in the mist, waiting, watching. I lit another smoke, my last one, the glow of faint comfort in the gloom, my fingers trembling as I exhaled, the smoke swirling with my breath, my thoughts spinning. Drugs? Guns? Something worse? I dropped the cash in Denver that morning, a dumpster behind a gas station, the bills fluttering like dead leaves as I walked away, my heart pounding, my eyes darting for that black truck, but it hadn't shown, not then. Now, the fog pressed in, the rig shuddered over a pothole, the photo stuffed in my pocket a weight heavier than the cash, a secret I couldn't bury, a mark I couldn't erase. The heat shimmered off I-70 in Kansas that afternoon, a flat, endless hell of wheat fields and dust stretching to the horizon, the sun a white-hot hammer pounding the asphalt, my rig rattling with a load of grain sacks, the trailer swaying slightly, my eyes darting to the mirror every few seconds, my hands steady on the wheel but my gut churning like a storm was brewing inside me, 6 weeks deep into a game I hadn't signed up for. The photo in my pocket was creased now, me in Phoenix, caught on camera, a timestamp trap I couldn't unsee, proof I was more than a mule now, proof I was a target. The phone had rung twice since Denver. I'd followed orders, ditched the cash in that dumpster, watched it sink into the trash as I drove off, but the voice came back, first in a crackling call at dawn, "You're not done, Travis." Next load, Wichita. Then again last night, sharper, "Pick it up tonight." I'd cursed into the deadline, my voice hoarse, my fist slamming the dash hard enough to bruise my knuckles, my resolve cracking like the dry earth outside. Today, the road was quiet, too quiet, the fields rolling past in a monotonous blur, my CB buzzing with chatter, some trucker griping about a wreck ahead, another joking about a barmaid in Topeka, but it faded to static as I hit a jam, cars piled up, their horns blaring, cops waving red flares through the haze, their vests bright against the dust. I slowed, my rig groaning to a stop, my eyes catching it on the shoulder, the black truck, parked, waiting, its paint gleaming despite the grime, its driver a shadow behind the wheel, cap pulled low, a hand lifting a phone to his ear. My burner buzzed in sync, my heart stopped, the voice colder now. "You're late, Travis. Check the load." I hadn't checked, not this time, not after Phoenix, not after the photo. I'd told myself it was just grain, told myself I could keep driving blind, but the words sank in, clawing at me, the realization hitting like a punch, whatever I was hauling, it wasn't grain, not all of it. I gripped the wheel, my breath shallow, my eyes locked on that truck, the cop ahead oblivious, the cars honking around me, my mind racing. What was in those sacks? Who was this guy? The traffic inched forward, the black truck didn't move, just watched, a hunter sizing up prey, and I knew, I was running out of road. The wind howled across I-35 in Oklahoma that night, a wild, restless gust rocking my rig side to side, the headlights slicing through the dark, the road a narrow thread winding through fields and scattered trees, my hands numb on the wheel, my mind a tangle of fear and rage. 7 weeks since Tulsa, 7 weeks of running blind with no end in sight. The black truck was closer now, a predator in my mirror, its lights flickering a mile back, steady and unrelenting, its presence a noose tightening with every mile I put behind me. I'd checked the load in Wichita last night, midnight at a rest stop off the highway, the lot empty except for a flickering lamp and the hum of crickets, my rig parked under a sagging oak, its branches clawing at the sky. I'd climbed into the trailer, my flashlight shaking in my hand, my knife cutting through the tarp, grain sacks, yeah, piled high, their burlap rough under my fingers, but underneath, boxes, unmarked, heavy, sealed with thick tape, their weight wrong, too solid for parts or tools. I didn't open them, didn't dare, just stood there, my breath ragged, my light bouncing off the edges, my gut telling me, drugs, guns, something worse, something that explained the cash, the photo, the tale. The phone rang as I climbed back into the cab, the voice sharp, cutting through the wind. "Keep moving, Travis. Dallas next." I'd yelled into the deadline, my voice swallowed by the night, my fist slamming the door, my resolve shattering like glass. The road blurred now, my CB silent, the wind rattling the windows, my eyes catching a glint, another truck, gray, pacing me from the left lane, its paint dull but its intent sharp, boxing me in clean. I floored it, the rig groaning under the strain, my pulse hammering, my thoughts a scream. This wasn't a job anymore, this was a trap, and I was the bait, caught between two hunters I couldn't outrun. The gray truck matched my speed, the black one closed the gap, the highway stretched on, empty and merciless, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel, my mind racing. Who were they? What did they want? The photo in my pocket burned, the boxes in the trailer weighed me down, the wind howled louder, and I drove, blind and trapped, into the dark. The rain pounded I-20 in Texas that morning, a deluge flooding the road, turning it into a slick, muddy river, my wipers useless against the sheets of water, my rig fishtailing through the muck, the trailer swaying dangerously, my hands locked on the wheel, my chest tight with a panic I couldn't shake, 8 weeks of secrets piling up like wreckage in my wake. Dallas was yesterday, another drop-off, another dumpster behind a gas station, the rain soaking me as I tossed the boxes, their weight thudding against the metal, another order crackling through the phone. Shreveport next. The black truck hadn't let up, its shadow constant in my mirror, its driver a specter I couldn't name, and now the gray truck had joined, a second hunter in the pack, their lights cutting through the storm like knives. I'd found a bug in the cab last night, a tiny black dot wired under the dash, its red light blinking faintly. I'd ripped it out, crushed it under my boot, tossed the pieces into the rain, but the damage was done. They'd heard me curse, heard me mutter to myself about the photo, heard me break, my voice shaking as I lit cigarette after cigarette, the cab thick with smoke and regret. The photo in my pocket was creased and damp now, my face staring back from that Phoenix night, a mark I couldn't erase, the boxes in the load a curse I couldn't outrun. The phone buzzed mid-storm, the voice a snarl through the static, "You're slipping, Travis. Don't stop." I didn't answer, didn't move, just drove, my eyes on the flooded road, the water splashing up to the windows, my mirror catching both trucks now, black on my right, gray on my left, closing in tighter, their engines roaring over the rain, my rig a cage, my life a thread about to snap. The CB crackled faintly, a trucker's voice warning about flash floods ahead, but it faded to noise as I pushed on, my hands slick with sweat and water, my mind racing. What was in those boxes? Who was listening? The rain hammered louder, the road vanished under the flood, the trucks pressed closer, and I drove, trapped in a storm I couldn't escape. The sun set blood-red over I-10 in Louisiana that evening, a heavy dusk settling over the bayou, the swamp stretching out on both sides, its water black and still, cypress trees clawing at the sky, their moss dangling like ghosts, my rig rumbling through the muck, my hands slick with sweat, my eyes hollow from no sleep, 9 weeks of hauling hell, 9 weeks of no way out. Shreveport was hours ago, another drop-off, another load picked up, more boxes I didn't check, their weight settling into the trailer like a sentence, the black and gray trucks tighter now, their lights a constant threat in my mirror, pacing me through the swamp. The phone had rung at noon, the voice flat, emotionless, "Last run, Travis. Mobile." I'd nodded to no one, my throat dry, my mouth tasting of ash, my mind numb as I drove, the cab a tomb of cigarette butts, crumpled coffee cups, and regret, the air thick with the stench of diesel and fear. I'd found a gun in the glove box this morning, tucked under a stack of old maps, its metal cold and heavy, loaded with 6 rounds, a message, a tool, a choice I didn't want to make. I'd held it, my hand shaking, my finger tracing the trigger, my thoughts spiraling, shoot my way out. End it? Toss it? I'd shoved it back, slammed the glove box shut, but its weight lingered, a shadow in my mind. The road twisted now, narrow and slick, my CB dead, my rig slowing as the swamp closed in, the trucks behind me splitting, one veering left, one right, flanking me clean, their engines a low growl over the cicadas. My burner buzzed, my hands fumbled for it, the voice a hiss through the line, "You're done, Travis. Pull over." I didn't, I couldn't, I floored it, the rig roaring, my heart a drum pounding in my chest, my eyes darting between the road and the mirror, my secrets a noose I'd tied myself, tightening with every mile, the swamp watching, silent and hungry. The night exploded on I-10 near Mobile, Alabama, a chaos of lights and metal tearing through the dark, my rig screaming down the highway, the black truck slamming into my trailer, the gray one cutting into my lane, their headlights blinding me, my hands wrenching the wheel, my breath gone, 10 weeks crashing into this moment like a runaway train. I'd ignored the order, ignored the phone, ignored the gun, until now, my fingers closing on it as the black truck rammed again, my rig fishtailing across the wet asphalt, my mirror shattering in a spray of glass, the impact jarring my bones. The CB flared alive, voices yelling, cops, truckers, a chase I hadn't seen coming, blue lights flashing miles back, closing fast, their sirens a faint wail under the roar of engines. The phone rang one last time, the voice a roar through the static, "You're dead, Travis." I fired out the window, wild and blind, the shot cracking through the night, the recoil jolting my arm, the gray truck swerving hard, its tires screeching, the black one lunging again, its bumper crunching into my trailer. I saw it then, headlights ahead, a roadblock, state troopers in vests, guns drawn, their shouts lost in the wind, my rig barreling toward them, my brakes screaming as I yanked the wheel, the world spinning as I hit the ditch, metal tearing, glass flying, the trailer jackknifing behind me, the lockbox spilling open, cash scattering like confetti, boxes bursting, white powder exploding in clouds, bricks of it tumbling across the mud, a fortune in dust laid bare under the flashing lights. The trucks peeled off, their engines fading into the dark, my cab a crumpled wreck, my hands cuffed as troopers swarmed, their voices sharp, their guns trained on me, my name a whisper on their radios, Travis Miller, suspect, trafficking, my life over in a way I hadn't planned, my secrets spilling out like blood, but alive, somehow, my chest heaving, my eyes on the wreckage, the phone buzzing one last time in the dirt, silent now, A ghost I'd never outrun.